Let me just say, the Zera Shimshon in Parshas Bereishis is explaining that the Medrash says that Hashem, when Hashem created the world, He began to create it with Midas Adin, and then He saw that the world could not survive, and so He added to it the attribute of mercy. So the way that it's usually understood is that Hashem originally created the world with the attribute of judgment, with Midas Adin, meaning that the world would run according to judgment. If you did something good, you would be rewarded. If you did something bad, you would be punished. And there would be no time. There would be no delay in the reward and punishment. Because the attribute of justice says you do something right, you get rewarded. Do something wrong, you get punished. And that's the way the world would work. And the way it's usually explained is that Hashem saw the world could not survive. Because we are challenged and we do lots of bad things. And if every time we did something bad, we would be punished, we would all basically not be able to survive. We'd all be killed off very quickly because we would, every time we failed, we would get these terrible punishments. So Hashem saw that we as people needed delay, we needed time, we needed a teshuvah, the process, we needed something that gives us an opportunity to correct our misdeeds, and therefore Hashem added to the world the attribute of mercy, which puts in a delay, which gives us time to fix ourselves, which allows us to be forgiven for things, which allowed the world to continue to survive. Yes?
So, I don't understand in this Medrash why it says the world. The world, in general, the only beings, as far as I know, that have free choice are malachim and...
Even malachim don't really have free choice.
And human beings.
Right.
So why don't we just say that it's the problem here is mankind instead of the whole world? Because the rest of the world...
It means man. Again, the simple reading. It means the people in the world, but it means the world that God put into creation couldn't survive because humanity would constantly be failing and be destroyed. That's the simple understanding of it. Why use the word olam versus the people? That's an interesting point to note. But it does mean the people, and you would have something like a flood happening every generation, not just on a communal level. That's already after the Hashem added mercy into the world. You'd have every person would be struck by lightning every time you stole something. And the world couldn't survive that way. That's the way most commentaries read that midrash.
But if you were punished every time you did something, I thought this is the reason why we're not punished that way, is because there would be no freedom of choice anymore. Who would in their right mind would do something wrong if they knew they were going to be struck by lightning and they see it happening every time, or they see that every time they do something they're punished? There's no longer free choice.
Very good. That's exactly the question that the Zera Shimshon is going to start with asking. He's saying, on the contrary, if every time you do bad things you get punished, wouldn't that change us and make us people who are doing less bad things? Let's go straight to that question. Page Nun-Hey, all the way on the left side, in the top of the page, the second paragraph. Aval od yesh ledaktek. I have a difficulty with this medrash. But Masha Amar medrash, the medrash says, Ra she'ein ha'olam miskayim. Hashem saw the world would not survive. He says that's not true. The other Rabbi, on the contrary, Imaya ha'olam nivra b'din, had the world been created with the attribute of judgment, lo ha'yereshayim ba'olam kanal, there would be no bad people in the world. Everyone would just be doing the right thing. B'imaya kulam tzadikim, and if everyone's doing the right thing, lama einu yachol lamod, why couldn't the world survive?
What does kanal mean?
That no one could withstand that. No one could live up to that.
Well, the question, when we say the world was created with the attribute of justice, what do we mean? So I think the simple understanding is that if you kill, you die. If you steal, you lose your arm. If you do a minor sin, you'd get zapped, or you'd get something small. So we would just avoid doing anything big. Yeah, we'd constantly be getting zapped, but it would change us and make us almost robotic, maybe. But and that's what we mean when we say everyone sins. It's because we have a full free will. If we had this, I think that's what the doctor was saying, is that we would lose our free will to a certain extent, because if every time you sinned it hurt like you put your finger in fire,
Skinner box.
right? Right?
Pavlov.
Right? Yeah. Okay. V'yesh Lomar suggests the Zera Shimshon a whole new reading of this midrash. Sharei Shaninu, we have a famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Omed. The world stands upon three things: Torah, Avoda, Echad Minayu, and the third one is Gemilus Chasadim. The world stands on three things: Torah, Avoda, the service of God, which we understand is tefillah, our davening, and the third is Gemilus Chasadim, acts of kindness. The world needs three things. There needs to be a steady stream of constant, the famous Nefesh HaChaim, that if there would be a moment that the planet Earth would not have somebody studying Torah, the whole universe would cease to exist. That's what the Nefesh HaChaim says. And he says that's why God created all these time zones where so that it shouldn't be 3 o'clock in the morning in all places, because there could be a 3 o'clock in the morning when there isn't someone studying. But now, because you have yeshivas all over the world, you have people studying all the time. So the reason is because the world needs Torah. There needs to be someone davening at every point in time. And there needs to be constant acts of kindness. What's the reason for this? He says, what's the source for the obligation to do kindness? So our sages tell us, V'halachta b'drachav. You should walk in the ways of God. Mahu ubo sidbak. You should cling to the ways of God. Mahu gomel chasadim. Just as God does acts of kindness, Afata gomel chasadim. You too should do acts of kindness. It does not say anywhere in the Torah that you should be merciful. It doesn't say, thou shalt be merciful. It doesn't say in the Torah, thou shalt be gracious. It doesn't say in the Torah, you should be patient. It doesn't say in the Torah, you should be forgiving. It doesn't say that in the Torah. But what it does say is two simple words, V'halachta b'drachav. You should walk in the ways of God. We are following a biblical obligation, one of the 613 commandments, when we look at the way God interacts with us and we emulate those attributes, at that point we are fulfilling one of the 613 mitzvahs. For example, someone is sick, chas v'shalom, you go visit them. You did a mitzvah, bikur chol. Where does it say that you should go visit the sick? It doesn't say that anywhere in the Torah. But it does say that Hashem visited Abraham when he was sick. That's the source for the mitzvah of Bikkur Cholim. And that's why when there are some who say that when you go to visit the sick, you're actually supposed to say, before you go in, I am going to visit this person in order to fulfill the biblical commandment of emulating the ways of God. Because that's, according to many opinions, when you fulfill a mitzvah, you're supposed to know which mitzvah you're fulfilling.
So it's not just the 13 attributes, it's all the examples that we were given.
Right. So everything which we see, right, so being merciful, being gracious, being patient, these are of God's 13 attributes. When you do them, when you're patient with someone calls you up and they're keeping you on the phone for 2 hours and you still don't know what they're talking about, then you're supposed to say, God has patience for me and my garbage, so then I'm going to do this to someone else. I'm going to be patient and listen and and do all the things that I have to do in order to, or, if someone is being disturbing and you want to shout at them and you want to tell them to stop doing this, but you say, I do things, and God has not yet struck me down with lightning, so I'm going to give this person patience. When you do that, you're fulfilling a mitzvah of v'halachta b'drachav, of walking in the ways of God. And that's the source for kindness and mercy. Says the Zera Shimshon, he pulls this one out. Had God not added the attribute of mercy into creation, we would not be required to do kindness.
Wow.
If God would have created the world with the attribute of judgment, then we would all be required to follow the strict letter of the law. And we would not show people kindness and mercy and patience and tolerance. If God would have created the world with judgment, we would have been required to emulate the ways of God and treat people according to their actions, whatever they do to me. And there would be nothing but jealousy and hatred and quarreling amongst people. That's why the world couldn't survive. Not because we would, every time we would do an act against God, we would be punished. We'd find a way around that. The problem is we couldn't survive with each other if the world was created with the attribute of judgment. Right? What?
We're having a hard enough time.
Right?
With this.
Because we'd be very careful between our interactions between man and God so we don't get punished. But we wouldn't share with each other. We would say, listen, God gave me money, didn't give you money. Why should I share with you? And the truth is, if God created the world with the attribute of judgment, things are as they are. There would be no charity, there would be no kindness, there would be no patience, there would be no tolerance. He saw the world could not survive, not because of the interactions between God and man, between people and people. Shitav imo midas arachmim, God joined in the attribute of mercy. What a beautiful explanation. So then the question is, okay, so that's good. So now we've re-explained that God originally created the world with the attribute of justice, because the world would have been good, everyone would have behaved. But then he saw the world couldn't survive, which he explains means people wouldn't be nice to each other, so he added the attribute of justice. Of mercy. The attribute of mercy, which is God showing mercy to people, and we now have to emulate that and show mercy to each other. The question is, and this is a famous question that everyone asks, well then why didn't God just do so in the first place? We don't have in other places in creation where God says, you know what, should we hang up the frame like this? Should we do it like this? Should Earth be flat? No, people fall off the edge. All right, let's make it around.
That Hashem wanted to destroy the world by Yinochem Hashem.
That's later. We're talking about the process of creation. We don't have the thought process of God where God says, maybe we should do it like this. Maybe we should make it a blue sky or a yellow sky. Let's try all the different kinds of things. Let's bring in the angel from Home Depot to offer us more choices in color. We don't have that process. How come over here we're told that God originally intended and then changed it? What's the point of that? So he says, now according to the new understanding of what this medrash means, God had to start off the world, creating it with the attribute of judgment, and then afterwards to add the attribute of mercy. He says, because had God originally created the world as a mixture of mercy and judgment, Hayisi Omer, I would have said, I would have said that you always need to compromise. I would have said, there's a famous debate in the Gemara, when you have a case where the judge is unable to figure out who is right or wrong. And in many cases are black and white, but I'm sure he can tell you, many cases not so clear. You look at it, and even after you see all the information, and you assume you have all the information, it really is a toss-up. It's hard to know who should get the money. So there's a debate in the Gemara what the best way to approach is. There are many different opinions in the Gemara. But basically the two schools of thought is, one is that we should move to compromise. And the other one is that we should find a way to judge the case using the information we have. Because there are those who prefer pshara, compromise, and there are those who prefer din, that you should always... And this is a debate which runs through the Talmud among certain sages who preferred compromise and other sages who preferred... And there are many judges who will try to avoid, in the Gemara it says so, and even today there are judges who that's the first thing they'll want to do. Instead of dealing with a difficult case, let's just make a compromise, or at least offer a compromise to the two sides. Do you still have this? Before the case even begins. You know what? Why don't you guys just... And if they don't take it, then fine, all right, we'll go through the case. Then the others who say, no, that's wrong. Because a compromise, interestingly enough, is never right. If I say, this guy owes me $1 million, the other guy says, no, I paid you back already. So saying pay $500,000, that's certainly wrong, because nobody says you owe $500,000.
To give you an example, if somebody sues a company and it's a lawsuit, but the company is very rich, very, Coca-Cola or something, they're going to say, compromise, give him something and let him go away. So that's not justice. This guy actually is almost like a ganav.
Right, to a certain extent. So this is a long-standing debate in the Gemara as to whether compromise is a preferred thing or it's an act of injustice.
We shouldn't confuse this, though, with what you described. Because what you described may be judged purely on the basis of what's the best business decision for the company.
Yeah,
And it's got nothing to do with right or wrong or justice.
no, but I'm saying it
purely a
comes
business
from the
decision.
person who's litigating, the person who's coming in and suing the company.
Suing, maybe he's taking more than he deserves because they got a lot of money.
Yeah, but the company will resolve that on the business decision.
Right, no,
How Kadosh Baruch Hu deals with a ganef, that's a separate issue. That's not for us.
No, it's true. I think that we don't have to get caught up in the example, but the point, I think everyone understands that there are positives to compromise, but there are negatives to compromise. So
Why are you equating mercy and compromise? They're two different concepts.
So he's saying that the joining of mercy and judgment is a balance which suggests a form of compromise. So he's saying that when the world was originally created with the attribute of judgment, at that point there's no place for compromise. When God joins the attribute of justice and the attribute of mercy, that's justice tempered with mercy. He says is going to end up being a form of compromise. Where the judge says, you know what, you really should be put in prison for 30 years. We'll put you in prison for 10 years, but you better behave because the next time we're going to make it worse. That's mercy, but
Mercy is when you absolutely voluntarily do something out of goodness. Compromise is when you weigh your risks, and benefits, and you say, like in your example, well, it could go this way, it could go that way. So you hedge your bets, and you say, okay, listen, I can't tell you which way it's going to go. So that's a different concept.
right. But if it's based on a sort of form of mercy, which is what he's saying in the case of God, where a person commits a sin, and God says, you know what, we'll give you some time and we'll lower the punishment. That's like a form of compromise, and he's saying that's a result of the joining of.
When does this concept come into creation? Because in the beginning of creation, it's black and white. There's night and day. There's water and dry land. It's very dim. When does Rachamim come into play?
According to, it's hard to know the exact moment, but the best clue we have is the fact that it says, Bereishis bar Elokim, Vayomer Elokim,
And it says...
Vayomer Elokim, and then as soon as the 7 days are over, it says, Eila told the Shemai Baram, B'yom Asos Hashem Elokim. It switches to Hashem and Elokim. So according to the Gemara, at least, that's when it switches to. So he says the Zera Shimshon is that we know that in the end, the Talmud tells us that it's preferred that we do din, if you can. Compromise is good only when you have no choice. But if there's a way to figure out the case, don't go immediately to compromise just because you feel bad. Judgment is judgment. If that guy owes the money, yeah, he's poor, he's rich, doesn't mean that the rich man isn't entitled to his money back. And you can't say, well, we feel bad for him. If the case is a case which is judgeable, if that's a word, then you're supposed to judge it. If you're faced with the situation, at least that's how he's understanding the conclusion of the Gemara. So he says that's what God did. God created the world originally with the attribute of justice to say that
Say no,
it's
it can't.
supposed to be. It's supposed to be that things run according to judgment. It's supposed to be that when you sin, you get punished, you do the right thing, you get rewarded. You should know that there's a special stipulation or a special clause put into creation that allows for the joining of the attribute of mercy. But originally, it's supposed to be with the attribute of judgment.
Maybe the compromise word is not such a right word to use then.
Well, that is the word that is the translation.
The alternative options, maybe that would
Right.
be-
Well, that's the word for pshara. You see, because compromise is maybe we translate the word incorrectly, but compromise just means let's go halfway
sides don't get
between.
everything they want.
Right.
Right.
Right. So he says in Matzinu, Shakadosh Baruch Hu Adar Rabbi Rotze Bedin, God prefers judgment. V'lo hiter pshara el lekiyim ha'olam. The only reason why we have the concept of compromise or mercy or all these other things is so that the world would survive.
We say tzedek u'mishpat machoin kisacho. Tzedek and mishpat is your throne, right? The abode of your throne. So that means that Hashem prefers tzedek and mishpat.
V'zen nami she'amar HaKasav, he quotes another verse, Va'oz melech mishpat ahev. And the strength of God is that He's the King who loves justice. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shehu HaMelech V'yesh Lahu, He has the power, B'vadei she'ohav mishpat v'din, God prefers that there should be judgment. That's why God originally creates the world with the attribute of judgment. When He saw the world couldn't survive, He adds the attribute of mercy. Let's leave the rest of that verse, which means like this, a very interesting thing. According to the Zera Shimshon, when a judge judges a case, he's supposed to see himself sort of in the place of God and say, if there could be judgment, there should be judgment. The world would, and then you have to look at the case and say, well, you have to consider this person didn't know what he was doing, that person's in a difficult situation, this person, they were stuck, and then you add onto that the factors, and then you add mercy. And this wouldn't just be true for judges, this would be true for parents and anyone who's in a role of authority. If a boss to his employees, you have to look at it first with the attribute of judgment, and then once you've recognized what it should be with the attribute of judgment, if that works, then you do it, but if it doesn't, if there's considerations for mercy and compromise, then you add that in, much like Hashem Himself, who you're supposed to follow in His ways, first created the world in Midas Hadin, and then considered what the world needed to survive, and added the attribute of mercy.
Is that why judges are called Elohim? Because that's the...
Maybe, because they're supposed to emulate the ways of God in a certain extent in their job, maybe.
But if it's not judges, if it's people like us, we're always told that if somebody looks at you wrong way or yells at you or whatever, you're supposed to put themselves, start thinking why they might have done it, and and they didn't mean anything, and don't be humble and don't be judgmental and all of this kind of stuff. So that's much more rachamim than it is.
Well, let me define this more clearly. You see, the thing is, a person is walking down the street and they're wearing funny clothes. No one appointed me judge over that person. So I shouldn't be judging that person at all. Someone walks into shul and they're dressed in a way that most people aren't dressed today. No one appointed you, the fashion police. And the same is true of people's behaviors and people's choices in life. If somebody wants to do something in life which doesn't affect anyone else, it's not our business. And therefore, when we're not appointed as judge, we shouldn't even have a place to consider, well, how should I judge that person? It's the issue here is, and that's why when I see someone else doing something, if it's not something that affects me or affects people around me, it's not someone who's disturbing others, it's not someone who's doing something that might influence others, I really need to mind my own business, and that's where I should judge that person favorably. So if you see a person who's eating food which, it's not like you have to educate them. You know that it's not kosher, and you know that that person knows it's not kosher, and you jump to conclusions. You might want to ask them. You say, well, how come you're eating, Burger King fries? You might want to ask them, and they'll say, "Well, actually, someone just got off the plane and bought me from Israel, right? An old gag that people do. Yeah, benefit of the doubt, because it's not your place to judge them. But I'm saying, when you're in a role of authority, and your job is to judge someone. Let's say you are a boss and you have an employee. You need to make a decision about that employee who has now shown up late or missed 3 weeks straight. Now you have a choice to make. It is your job to judge that person, and you can't judge that person favorably. And maybe initially, before it becomes your role to do something about them, you should assume that the excuses they're making are true, and you should. But eventually, it comes time to make a decision. So you can fire the person, or you can put that person on probation, or you can ignore it. Right? The mercy, compromise, or the other extreme. When it is that role, you're saying that it becomes your job to first assess it in terms of judgment and say, well, if we would stick to the strict letter of the law, what would we do? And then introduce all the mitigating factors and add the mercy and the compromise.
In the first example that you gave of Dean, what was it again? I'm trying to think. It wasn't the boss, but it was seeing somebody with fries with Burger King. Okay, so what happened to Hochayach?
That's why I say, if you know, they know, and so then
You still shouldn't say anything if you know they know. Like if you know somebody.
Well, you have to ask it. You have to ask. You can't judge there. There, you have to first find out what's going on before you jump to conclusions. Then, if you know that they're doing something wrong, and you see there are other people who are there, again, those are the rules of giving tochacha, of giving musar. I'm saying before you get there, before you know they've done something wrong, before it becomes your place to do something, you first have to find out the information, and you have to make sure.
Okay,
Does
so
the Rabbi say, did you wonder why I killed the cow? Did you wonder why I put the house down? There's all these mushals that show you that there's so many extenuating circumstances. Why
Right, so you have to first find out.
If you say to them, how come you're eating fries from Burger King, and they say, I just had a yearning for it, and I decided I would
That's
try
between
it.
them and God and Yom
There's no
Kippur.
meeting.
No, there is. At that point, you're still not judging them. You say to them, I think they fry it in lard. I don't know if they do. So that might be a biblical prohibition of eating pig.
Or you can just ask him, does that taste better than the kosher
French
fries?
You say, I know it's not quite as bad as eating real treif, but I think even the fries they're not kosher, and the utensils are not kosher, and halachically that's a problem. That's still not judging someone. You're informing them. If they say I don't care, you say, well, I understand you don't care, and then you have to know the person. The different people you would then speak to differently. Some people will say, well, if you ever want to know more information about why it's important to keep kosher, I'm here. Some people you have to say something, and that's the problem with giving tochacha today, is that we all say what we think instead of thinking, well, what does this person need to hear right now in order for them to be able to improve in the future? And that's something which maybe we don't know how to do in that particular example. But this is still not a place where we're there to judge, to lay down the law on someone.
So I'm confused by why it's all right for us to say that Hashem created the world with an unanticipated deficiency that he then had to fix.
No, that's exactly what he's saying. He's saying that God created two systems, the preferred way, and then inserted on top of it the layer necessary in cases where it's necessary to teach us to behave like that, to teach us that we're supposed to try to live in a world where judgment is done preferably in first case in preferred, and then when we need to, we should insert compromise and mercy, but not that we should run there all the time. And that's why God first creates the world with judgment and then inserts the mercy and the compromise.
Judges before we had kings.
So it's not as if he had to fix something.
Right,
that-
exactly. That's
right,
exactly
right,
what
right,
he's coming to answer.
Yeah.
He's saying, unlike all the other commentaries where God tried an experiment and then said, you know what, it's not going to
Right.
work. No, on the contrary, God wanted these two layers to tell us that you should know, I still prefer if two people come into court and you do see who's guilty and who owes the money, who doesn't, don't feel bad for one guy, oh, he's going to lose money. He owes the money, let him pay.
So-
When you don't know, or if there's some other mitigating circumstances, he meant, he thought, he this, then you can start to consider
So we almost
compromise.
have to take the word Tehillah first and change a little bit the translation. Instead of first in time, because what everyone is uncomfortable with, what do you mean, God did it, then he waited a few minutes, and then he said, oh, this is no good. He did it all simultaneously. However, in the order of things, he put the other one
Preferred
first.
one over the other.
First one
That's
is
a good way to put it.
simultaneously.
Okay? All right, let's turn to page Samach Vav. Okay, I'm not sure how much of this we'll be able to get in, but let's try. Page Samach Vav. Vayikra ha'adam shemos l'chala behema l'chal chayas hasadeh. Adam named all the animals, all the beasts and all the animals. Kasha, he says, the Ayla Loma Vayikra ha'adam Shem. Why does it say Shemos? He called names. The technical Hebrew he called a name, gave a name to every animal. Okay, so let's turn to the next paragraph. He says, Ve'inyin kriya zeh hashemos. The idea of giving names. Hani call nivra karutz mechomer. Every creation is made up of physical material. That is what we refer to as the periodic table of elements. If you break down every single object in the world, it will be made up of the smallest particles of matter. Now, in those days, they might have thought that it was earth, wind, fire, and whatever. All right, but today we understand that it's the all made up of different atoms. V'huhu hateva v'hagufnius v'hagashmius shall kol davar. That forms the nature, the physicality, and the corporeality and the physicality of everything. Amnam Hashem shall kol nivra. The name of every creation. Hu chelek haruchanius shabo. That is the spiritual aspect of every creation. Ki Hashem hu yichud v'chibur al shem hamarkava alyona. The name of every object is its lifeline from a spiritual perspective. Which means this piece of plastic here is made up of petroleum, which is itself made up of combinations of hydrogen and carbon and whatever else it's made up of. That has its physical features, which makes it light but strong, and all these other features, which is why it was turned into a table, which is collapsible and then able to be set up again, because its nature, based on its chemical, physical, its makeup, that defines what kind of object it is and what it will be. But this also has a spiritual existence to it. It's also a concept, table. So this, what supports this, what keeps this in existence on the spiritual perspective, are the four letters Shin, Lamed, Ches, Nun, which form the word Shulchan. Because this exists as an object that exists with a name, that's what allows it to exist in the world. Shal Yidei Tzirav Osias HaTorah Mislabish V'Amurchanius, because everything is also a combination of the letters of the Torah, and those of you who have understood the matrix can understand this from that perspective. Everything is a combination of letters of the Torah. Ki Osias HaTorah Levadam Yesh B'M Kedusha Rabbi. Even the letters themselves have holiness. Okay, he quotes in the rest of the paragraph, he quotes halacha that if someone holds a chart with the aleph base on it and swears by it, it might be considered swearing by the Torah because the Torah is made up of 22 letters.
So, I'm sorry, this is a little hard concept. The actual giving it of a name using the spiritual alphabet of Hebrew is what gives it its existence in the world on a spiritual level.
Right.
Its physical level is the molecules,
Right.
but its essence is because we've given it a name using holy letters.
Right. The next paragraph. This is the wisdom of Adam. Shekara Shemus l'chol nevram. He named all the creations. Hainu she'al yidei Hashem, by bringing down a name, hilbish behem ruchanias. He gave them spiritual life. V'ruchanias azehu tzinor lahamshech aleim kiyum b'shefa me'olam ha'elyon. And this name that he brought down to all the objects is what gave them spiritual existence.
You know, someone asked me yesterday, how is it that the moon complained about the sun? They're inanimate. I go, well, how is it that you cover a challah so it won't be embarrassed by the wine? Because so now this answers that, because it has a spiritual existence.
Everything
it has a personality. You would be insulting its spirituality by saying kiddush
Right.
without covering
There's
it.
a spiritual force, right?
That's really
Okay, so
fascinating.
I'm going to say the rest outside because we're running short on time, except for one paragraph. So he says, the verse tells us, "V'kol asher yikra lo ha'adam nefesh chaya hu shemo," a very difficult verse to translate. And all that man named a living soul, that was its name. And the grammar is incorrect. It should be all living souls that Adam called a name, that was its name. So he says in the next page, "Amlam darkenu asu shaper," but now you understand. The verse says, "Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim." God blew into the nostrils of man the soul of life. Vayihi ha'adam lenefesh chaya. A man became a living being. Man was given spiritual existence, not when he was given a name, because he had to exist before that, because he named himself, but when God breathes into him the soul of life. And then what man did, so therefore Adam took of the spiritual existence that he was given by God breathing into him the soul of life, which endowed Adam with wisdom and understanding. And he allowed that wisdom and understanding to channel itself into a comprehension of the essence of each individual animal. And he turned that essence and that understanding that he had into a word, and that word became the channel for the existence of each of the animals.
That's how we joined in creation.
Right?
So this is powerful when we give a child a name.
Right. He says, that's exactly what he's going to say. Yeah. This is by him understanding the combination of the aleph base. God gave him the wisdom, along with God giving man a soul. He gave him the wisdom to understand creation. And Adam said, you are a aleph resh yud. You are an ari. Or really, an aryeh is the full word. Now, aryeh is the same letters as the word yira, which means fear, same numerical value as the word gevura, which means strength. It's an aryeh that he understood the essence of the animal. So, lion isn't the real name. That's just the word we all agreed to call it. But aryeh is its true essence. Then the question is, then why didn't God himself name all creations? The answer is obvious. Basically, he says that God wanted man to do it. Now he gives the reason, because since creation would eventually be destroyed, God wanted man. When God does something, it can't be destroyed, but when man does something, it can be destroyed. But the point is, however it's understood, God did not want it that God should name the animals, but instead he endowed mankind with the power to understand creation, to understand the true essence of creation, and to name it. The next paragraph, this is why boys are not given a name until they get a bris, because he's not complete. He's not done being created. Because first have to remove the foreskin, the blockage, and then we give him a name to bring down spirituality and holiness. But you can't bring down the name of holiness. That's what you were referring to before. We're told that there are 2 times that every person experiences prophecy. The first is when you find a shidduch, a zivug, when you find your bashert. That's an act, a little mini act of prophecy, and the second is when you name children. Even though you think you're giving your name, what you're really doing is you're finding the true essence of the soul of that person and channeling it down into the world. That was power was given to Adam, to all of creation. That's the power of naming something, and that's why a person's Hebrew name is so spiritually powerful. And that's why when you call someone up to the Torah, and it should be, we should use Hebrew names more often than just when someone's called up to the Torah or sick, chas v'shalom, or anything like that. The Hebrew name is a powerful name, which we all have to. But that's the power that was given to Adam, and that's what the Torah is telling us about the power of Adam Rishon. Thank you.